The next piece of music is one of the most beautiful themes for movies that of all time, in my opinion. And this comes from a great composer who passed away a few years ago, Ennio Morricone. And he wrote this score for a movie called The Mission. And in the opening scene of this movie, it's in Brazil during the colonialist time, but 200 years ago, in Brazil, you see a Jesuit priest, a Jesuit monk, being thrown while he's nailed to a big cross, and he's being thrown from the jungles, from the high plain of the jungles down a waterfall, and he's being thrown down, and he's going down the river. Somebody killed him. That monk in the movie was one of the group of monks who tried to go up to the higher plains where the native people in Brazil lived, in an area that the colonialist Spanish and the military and the church never reached to that place where native people lived. And those monks tried to get there and to convert the natives to Christianity. And the natives didn't take it at all. They just killed the monks and threw them down the waterfalls. That's the beginning of the movie. And then there's one monk who is a musician. He has an oboe in his backpack, and he climbs up there. He goes up there to that very dangerous territory. And he feels that he's being followed. He's being watched by the native people. They're watching him. And then he gets to a place, he opens his backpack, he puts together an oboe, and he starts playing music. And that music opened the heart. You're going to hear it. And that is the beginning of the relationship of that one monk that was a musician and really was a heartfelt person who didn't want it to take the land from the natives. And he ended up fighting with the natives against the colonialists that were trying to take their territory. And he brought them this message of love through music. And they accepted him. So that's a very key moment in the movie. And let's try to understand how the music works there. First of all, the monks are from Spain. They're Spanish. So the music starts. The very first thing that he plays, he kind of tells them of his culture, because the very first notes have a Spanish flair. Listen to that Spanish lick. You see? That's a typical Spanish little combination. So the first thing that he says, he tells them about himself. And then he goes to this line where there's 3 times something that we called in music a major sixth. A major sixth is a large interval, and it's like an outreach. It's not a neighboring note. It's not a step. It's a leap. It's almost like a leap of faith. It's like outreach. It's like giving a hand to somebody on the other side of the river. And in the music, you hear that. So let's just hear those 3 major sixths outreach. You hear that da-da. And then second time. And the third time, it's more dramatic. So he's reaching his hand as if through the music. So as you listen to the piece, this is going to be a solo cello. Remember all those things that we just shared with you and try to feel it as Dennis played this very, very beautiful piece from The Mission by Ennio Morricone. Okay. The next composer happened to be myself. I was called to compose a score for a movie called West Bank Story that is a spoof of West Side Story, which is was a Broadway play and also a movie, a score written by Leonard Bernstein. And the director wanted me to create a score that has 3 different musical traditions in it. And he called me and he said, you know, I talked to 3 different people in the industry in Hollywood, and all 3 gave me your name. And they said, you're the only one that could put those 3 musical traditions together and score it to a film. So I said, you know, what are the styles? And he said, well, the first style is a Broadway style, like Leonard Bernstein. The second one is a klezmer, East European Jewish style. And the third one is an Arabic style, because in the movie there's a Jewish-Israeli gang versus an Arabic-Palestinian gang, and they're fighting just like the Puerto Rican and the Irish gangs in West Side Story were fighting in the original film. So I said, okay, I can do that. And I put together a score. And that movie, I thought this was one of the most silly, campy film I ever worked on. And I had to write the songs, and I looked at the lyrics, and the lyrics seems to me so campy, so ridiculous. And I remember my wife came to my studio one day, and I'm working, composing music for those lyrics, and she said, what are you working on? And I said, it's a really, really silly film. Nobody gonna see it. It ended up winning an Oscar. So you never know in this business. So here's the suite from West Bank Story, and we're just going to demonstrate to you. In the original film, in the Broadway film, there's one song with a snap, because it's a very jazzy score that Leonard Bernstein put. So Dennis will start. You're going to hear him starting with a snap, and then in the violin, you're going to hear a reference to the original score, and this is in bar 18, I believe. Let's hear that little line. You're going to hear that, and do you know what that hints to? Somewhere, da, 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 from the original movie of Bernstein's score. So that's a really touch of the Broadway style. And then we have the klezmer East European Jewish music that the cello will play. So this has a completely different musical mode, a completely different musical culture that represent one of the gangs. And then in the violin, we're going to hear an Arabic folk style dance called debke, and it sounds like. So now let's hear how all those 3 musical traditions all mixed together in the opening scene of West Bank Story. So you can get a sense for the fun and the craziness and the satire in this movie, West Bank Story from 2007. The next two pieces come from a TV series. It's an animated Japanese TV series which you may have heard about. It's called Naruto. Naruto is a young ninja who lost his parents, and he gets into all kinds of challenges, and he's trying to be the hero and save the village. And he has special powers, and the composers Masuda and Takanashi are using in this main theme an element that we call in music the interval of open fifths and open fourths, which are very strong, heroic kind of sounds. And why do we think that they are heroic is because these intervals, these musical notes, were used in ancient times when the trumpet would make the fanfare for the king, and when the hunters would go hunting. The reason why they played that interval is that at that time they didn't have any valves and they couldn't play many notes. They could just blow through a horn, and if they blow softly, they would get one note. If they would blow harder, they would get the fifth note. And if they would blow in a different way, they would get the fourth note. And these would be the basic notes for fanfare. And since then, we associate it. There's another reason why we associate it. We associate it with power and strength. Another reason that we associate it, our brain associate it, is because those notes line up symmetrically as far as vibrations. So the note, the 1 and the 5 and the 1 and the 4th line up in a symmetrical way in the vibrations in the space. And our brain sees that alignment of the same frequencies aligned together, and our brain interpret it as strength. And that's how it's being used. That's why it's being used in film music very often when you need a heroic element. Let's hear what a perfect fourth or perfect fifth sound like in this piece, just those intervals. So that is a perfect fifth. Bum bum. That's how the trumpets would play. Bum ba bum. And that's what you hear in the violin. Any other intervals that we have there? That's the fourth. Bum ba bum. Right? A fifth or the fifth. That's the fifth. The previous one was the fourth. And both of them considered strong, bold instruments that we composers, Max and I and 2 million other composers who write for film, always use that. So if you listen to Star Wars, if you listen to any other heroic films, very often you would hear those bum ba bum kind of intervals. So we hear it right here in the main theme of Naruto. Can you believe that only 2 instruments made this sound? It sounds so full, and this was arranged by Max. Thank you, Max, for writing this piece for just cello and violin. So this sound heroic, right? The music tells you something heroic is going to happen, and this is really the music that is being played in the television series whenever Naruto gets into a fight and whenever he's being challenged. You hear this music, and the music tells you, the audience, how to feel about it, and how, as we talked about before, how your heartbeat gonna react and how your brain waves will be affected by the pulse of the music and the kind of intervals that the composer used. Now, from the same TV series, there's a different theme called the sad and sorrow theme, and that's whenever Naruto thinks about his father and his mother who were killed when he was young. So he's an orphan, and every once in a while he have this moment that he remembers his parents. And then the music comes in. And what makes this music make us feel for Naruto? It's very simple. It's a descending line that goes towards the one, the base of the musical mode, and it stops right before it and then resolves. So it's a descending line that make us feel a very particular way. Let's hear how that descending line that appears 8 times in the second half of the theme. 8 times. Every 8 pulsation, every 8 beats, you hear that again and again and again. Now listen to that and let's see how you feel about it when you hear it. You all feel it. It works right away on us, and this is why this music is being used in films, because it's a universal feeling that we all get when we hear this musical mode, which happen to be called the minor scale, the minor mode, and we hear it in a descending fashion, and we hear it in a slow beat, and we hear something called vibrato, right? Could you demonstrate what a vibrato, without a vibrato? Let's hear that phrase, without a vibrato. Now Max will add a trembling of the fingers that play the notes, which we call vibrato, and let's see what it's going to do. This is a lot more crying tone that comes from the way the violinist plays, and the composer can indicate how much of this vibrato. You can have a little vibrato, you can have a lot of vibrato, and the composer indicates it to the musician, and by that affect the emotions of the audience when the audience watch the film. So here's the sad and sorrow theme, again arranged by Max for violin and cello. The next film that we're going to visit through its score is called The Red Violin. It's an extraordinary film about the story of a violin, and it's going to be a solo piece for violin. And Max, could you share with us a little bit what this particular music communicates and why in that particular scene in the movie?
The Red Violin is a very interesting film. It's about a violin who's the maker of, we call it a luthier. A luthier is somebody who builds violins for musicians like myself to play. And the movie begins, and the maker has just finished the violin, but he has yet to put the varnish on the violin. The varnish is the color and the spirit that the violin takes on when it's been painted, and it gives it the shine. And right when he finishes the violin and before he puts on the varnish, his wife tragically passes away from childbirth. And we're talking like 1500s, 1600s, a long time ago. And he uses his wife's blood to give the violin a reddish hue, thus the Red Violin. The piece I'm about to play for you is the theme from that film. And what's interesting about this theme is that there's lots of space in between every musical phrase. It's almost like the maker has weeped a little bit and then stopped, and then weeps some more and then stopped. And that's what makes this theme particularly haunting.
And isn't there, at the end of many phrases, there's a descending half a tone going downward? Isn't that? Could you maybe play one or two of those phrases that ending up going down half a step? So descending lines with a musical mode that is a minor musical mode, just like in Naruto, going downward tells our brain that something not bright has happened, and it's going downward. So that's where the music goes. You know, sometimes people can look at the handwriting, especially if you write on a page that have no lines. You could see the mood of the person at the time, and if they write up, they're in a good mood. If they write downward on a page, that usually translates to some kind of a depression or just a darker mood at that time. There's a certain effects to the musical vibrations, and composers using those different methods to tell you how to think, tell you how to feel at a particular moment in the film. So you in the beginning of the film, you don't know anything about the story, but the music tells you it's a lament, there's a loss, there's a tragic element here. You can feel it. And that's why you believe the actors, you believe the story, you believe the editing, because the music have programmed you to feel what the director wanted you to feel. So let's listen to this extraordinary piece by John Coliano from the Red Violin. Thank you, Max. Beautiful. Joshua Bell is playing on the original recording. We have two more pieces to share with you. The next one is a great classic score by John Williams for the movie Schindler's List. And the movie Schindler's List is about the destruction of the Jewish community in Poland during the war, the Second World War II, and heroic action of one man named Schindler who saved hundreds of Jews in Poland, although he himself was German who was working for the Nazi party, and during the war he was a head of a factory that the Germans set up in Poland to exploit the new territories that the Germans conquered. But many of his workers were Jews, and during this horrible thing that was going on with the Holocaust, he realized that he had the power to save hundreds of people by faking it as if they work in this factory or giving them jobs. And as long as they were his workers, they were not sent to die. And that's how he saved hundreds and hundreds of Jews. And the film is about that. And the music by John Williams tried to recall not just the tragedy, but the music recalls the life that this community of Jewish people in Poland had. What kind of a life it was, what kind of a story they had, what kind of a culture they had. And the composer is trying to tell us with the music. And the theme borrows the framework of the Jewish national anthem. And we can hear it if, Max, would you play the first 6 notes of the Israeli national anthem? Right. So it's a climbing up from the 1 of the chord of the musical mode to the 5th, and then stretching the 5th to the flat 6, which make you this yearning feeling. So let's hear it a little slower, just going from the 1 to the 5th, and then the flat 6 yearning. This is the 5th, and now that's the yearning note, the flat 6. And this is the national Israeli anthem, which was written before the state of Israel was born. This was written in Europe, in East Europe. It's a Jewish tune from Eastern Europe that became the Israeli national anthem. So this music is the kind of music of these people that the movie is about. Now, what John Williams does, he takes the frame of this national anthem. He takes the first note, and he takes the 5th note, and he plays with them, 1, 5, 5, 1, 5, 1, and then he used that flat 6, that yearning note, as part of the melody. So let's just hear it really, really slow. 5th, 1, 5th, and that's the yearning note that is from the national anthem. And it's right there in Schindler's List. And you just immediately, when I hear this music, I am in the place where my grandparents came from. My grandparents were from a Jewish-Polish family, and all of their family was killed by the Nazis. And fortunately, my grandmother and my grandfather left Poland in 1920. They went to Israel, and that's why I'm here. I was born in Israel. My parents were born in Israel, but my grandfathers and my grandmother lost all the family in that place. And when I hear this music, somehow I'm connecting to that culture, to that place that I never really been in. I didn't grow up in Poland, but the music takes us there. And now we understand why. It's the building blocks of the music. So please, this is a arrangement by Max for Schindler's List. Okay, we've reached our conclusion piece. The last piece of this evening is music from Jurassic Park. And John Williams composed this music as well. And the first time that you see these magnificent animals, the dinosaurs, in the movie, the music had to tell you how magnificent and how majestic that animal is. So you believe it. Because if you had turned the volume down and you wouldn't hear the sound effects or the music, you just wouldn't feel as much majestic feeling as if you were listening to the music. And that's why the music is there. And then the composer used those open fifths and fourths that we talked about, and even open octaves. So these are, again, to remind you, these are the notes, the intervals that comes from the old days where people used to blow the trumpets when the king and the queen would enter. So all those fanfares were made with those intervals because that's the natural sound that comes out of the trumpet when you blow really hard or you blow really soft. So that was the basic music. On a deeper level, those vibrations of those intervals, the 1 and the 5, the 1 and the 4, and the 1 and the 8th, those notes, when you line them together, they are exactly symmetrical vibration. They are the only one that have exactly mathematical symmetry. So let's say the one note is vibrating at 400 cycles a second. The fifth maybe, or the octave would be exactly 800 cycles a second. And what happens is that those notes vibrate our ears and our nervous system in exactly the same mathematical multiples, and it creates a very bold vibration that pushes against all of our organs and our brain, and we humans interpret it as strength. We interpret it as boldness and strength, and that's why they use it for the fanfare for the kings, and that's why they use it in Hollywood movies, in those moments that you want the audience to feel a feeling of majestic. So now this is not a fanfare for the king, it's the fanfare for the dinosaur in Jurassic Park. So what does it sound like, Dennis, those intervals? Thank you. So listen to those intervals as part of this music. This is Jurassic Park from John Williams' score. Thank you for Dennis Karmazan on cello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for Max Karmazan for being here. Thank you for the beautiful playing. Question, Jeff.
Sometimes watching movies, well, first of all, thank you. This is great, and I love your introduction to the
I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Often watching movies or TV, I find that before the scene even starts, or at the very, very beginning, the music is manipulating. And I'm using the word manipulating.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to be feeling?
Right.
Versus, I would like to feel it, feel that emotion on my own, or come to that emotion
Yeah.
at that point on my own.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And you know, you would be one of the more sophisticated directors in Hollywood if you were working as a director in Hollywood, because you would tell the composer, I don't want any music here. The writing and the acting and the editing is enough. I don't need to go overboard. You know, and you're going to say, I'm going to use the music very gingerly. But you would be quite unique. And there's not a lot of directors and a lot of producers that go with that. They're really hitting the audience really hard with the music, telling them what to think, what to think. So in art movies, you know, in movies that are artistic, you have more, sometimes you have more sophisticated use of music and more silence. But you have to have really good acting and very good writing and very good editing in order to be exposed like that.
So why do the directors do that? Do they not have trust in the writing or in the actors?
I tell you from my experience as a composer for film and TV, and Max probably can talk to that. We come in at the last. Okay, the movie starts with writing the script, and then they cast it, and then they act it, they film it, and then they edit it, and then they bring the sound effects and the music. And a lot of time, when I get it at the very end, there are severe problems in the story. There's severe problems with the acting. They didn't have time to redo something. You look at the scene and you just don't believe. You don't believe the actress or the actor are crying, and you just don't believe that it's real. And then you put a really beautiful emotional score, and suddenly you believe the acting. So that's why they do it. If everything is really, really, really solid, you don't need some wall-to-wall music. You know, wall-to-wall music is what you get now, that it's non-stop. But look, movies are 2Ds. You see, I'm 3D right now. You believe that I'm here, I'm 3D. But if you take a photo of me or a video of me, I become 2D. And 2D is not as real as 3D. And in order to make it real, you need music and you need sound effects, because it makes us feel. And otherwise we wouldn't feel, because movies are flat. Any thought about that, Max? About why do they use so much music in Hollywood movies? Why it's wall to wall? Why can't they have silence a little bit more?
I think to a certain extent, at least the way that big studio filmmakers view filmmaking is that movies are an escape to a certain extent. I think they underestimate their audience's ability to pick up on certain things when making a film. There's a saying that you have to say something 3 times in a movie in order for the audience to truly pick up on it. To an extent, that's true, but to play devil's advocate, maybe music is overused in some parts, but I understand as well as movies are meant to distract us from our lives for 2 hours and suck us into a different world for 2.5 hours or so. And I think music is one of those conveyances of emotion. It just does not lie. Music it carries an immediate emotional connotation, as you can hear from the music we've played today from movies. You know when something's sad, you know when something's happy, and I think sometimes people just like to relinquish themselves into the film watching experience and just let it take them, as opposed to like, I don't want to feel this way here, or overanalyzing what they're seeing on camera.
You know, I wanted to share with you some anecdote. When my kids were really little, you know, they were 5 years old or 4 years old, they had friends who, the mother of the friends put her kids in front of, I think, Star Wars or something, and the kids were 4 years old, or some other, you know, action movie. And my kids told me that they were watching that movie with their friends, and I thought, this is really going to desensitize my kids and their friends with all this, violence and sound effects and all this intensity for 4 years old. So I talked to the mother, and I said, "Did you show the kids Star Wars?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "You don't think they would be scared? They would have nightmares?" She said, No, they don't have nightmares because I turned off the volume. They watch it with no sound." So, any other questions? Okay. So I'd like to thank Barbara Morrison, of course. Because of her, we're here. We want to thank Tim, who did the sound and brought us here to do this show. We hope to be back here to do more concerts and more workshops. We will going to be in touch with Tim about future events. If you'd like to be involved with this organization called Inspired Sound Initiative, this poster is on the wall over there below the Stevie Wonder portrait and below Barbara Morrison portrait over there. You can scan the QR code, you can go on the website, you can learn more about it, you can be part of it, you can contribute, you can be a volunteer, you can be an advisor, you can do whatever you want. Or if you just want to thank us or suggest things, please email us. And over there, near the wall, there's some wine, there's some drinks that by donation in the back there if you want. And also there's some CDs and books and vinyl in the back. There's 2 CDs of music that I composed and Dennis played the cello solo on. And there's also the score of West Wing Story, which you heard earlier. There's a soundtrack of that. Before we go, maybe Max, do you want to tell us just a word about what you do in film music? What kind of project you work on?
I do a lot of recording with my violin. I've played on The Lion King, the new Lion King, Frozen 1 and 2. I've recorded with Stevie Wonder. I just recently played the Oscars, which was an experience. But I also write music for film and TV, and I've contributed music to scores for James Cameron and Peter Jackson, and some animated projects, Sonic the Hedgehog.
So I have one question to you two. This is Dennis and Max, a father and son, wonderful musicians, and I'm just curious, who's more busy? Who's busier right now?
Well, I would have to say, whenever Max is not playing the violin, he's composing, so he can be in the studio for 15 hours a day. So I would say Max.
Max. Okay. I'll tell Inspired Sound to send Max a bigger check and a smaller check to Dennis. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
She's been a reasonably regular visitor to Melbourne over the last 10 years or so, and it's with great pleasure I'd like you to put your hands together for Ms. Barbara Morrison.